The CEO millionaire was enjoying his stay at Elite Hotel until he saw his ex-wife with his twins. Before going into the video, please leave us a like and a subscribe so we have the motivation to make the next videos. Damian Cole stood at the towering floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse suite, the shimmering city lights of Boston stretching endlessly before him. The skyline, an architectural masterpiece of steel and glass, reflected his own journey, a relentless climb to power, wealth, and prestige. In his hand, he swirled a glass of aged scotch, a drink he barely tasted, its warmth doing little to thaw the emptiness settling in his chest. Tonight should have been a night of celebration. Another billion-dollar acquisition finalized, another headline bearing his name, another reminder that he had conquered the business world. But as he gazed out at the city that once held all his ambitions, Damian felt nothing, no pride, no satisfaction, just a hollowness that had become too familiar. At 42, Damian had everything that society deemed the pinnacle of success: a global empire, a net worth most could only dream of, a name that commanded respect in boardrooms across the world. The media hailed him as a visionary, a kingmaker, a self-made titan who had turned a struggling family business into an international powerhouse. Yet, standing alone in his penthouse, the silence was deafening. His luxury condo, adorned with custom-designed furniture, priceless artwork, and the finest amenities, felt less like a home and more like a gilded cage. The solitude pressed down on him, whispering the truth he refused to acknowledge. He had built an empire, but lost himself in the process. It hadn't always been this way. Once, Damian had dreams beyond profits and stock prices. Once he believed success was about more than just wealth. It was about building something meaningful, something lasting. But somewhere along the way, his hunger for achievement had consumed him. He had chased deal after deal, sacrificing relationships, birthdays, holidays, and moments he could never get back. He told himself it was necessary, that the end justified the means, that someday he would slow down, breathe, enjoy life. But someday never came. He had sacrificed love for late-night negotiations, traded companionship for boardroom dominance, and convinced himself that people who truly cared would understand. He had told himself that anyone who couldn't keep up with his ambition simply didn't belong in his life. And now he was the last one left. His penthouse was quiet, not because he valued peace, but because there was no one left to fill the space. The soft chime of his phone pulled him from his thoughts. Another congratulatory message from his board of directors. Another reminder that, in their eyes, he was unstoppable. But was he? What did all this power mean if there was no one to share it with? He had spent years perfecting his public image, ensuring that Damian Cole was seen as an unshakable force, an untouchable leader. But behind the luxury suits and calculated confidence was a man who, when stripped of his titles and fortune, had nothing but regrets. The truth hit him hard, a weight in his chest heavier than any deal he had ever closed. He had won the game of business, but lost the game of life. The people who once mattered, those who had loved him before he was a billionaire, before he was a household name, were long gone. Not because they stopped caring, but because he had given them every reason to walk away. What was the point of all this? What was the point of nights like these, where he sat alone in a lavish penthouse, sipping expensive liquor that couldn't drown the loneliness? When had his victories begun to feel so empty? He had spent years convincing himself that happiness was a byproduct of success, that if he just reached the next milestone, he would finally feel fulfilled. But here he was, at the peak of his career, and the emptiness was worse than ever. For the first time in years, Damian admitted to himself that he wasn't truly living. He was merely existing, moving from one deal to the next, filling his time with distractions rather than purpose. He had become a master at creating wealth, but a failure at creating joy. And as he stood there looking at the city that had once held his dreams, he wondered if it was too late to change. If you've ever felt the weight of chasing a dream only to realize it left you feeling empty, you're not alone. Damian's story is a powerful reminder that success isn't just about wealth or power. It's about balance, about knowing what truly matters before it's too late. If you believe that true success should be measured not just in achievements, but in love, relationships, and the moments that make life worth living, let us know in the comments. Have you ever felt like you were chasing the wrong things? Do you know someone like Damien who needs to hear this story? Hit that like button to support Damien on his journey to rediscovering what truly matters. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story like this. Your support helps us bring you more inspiring content that speaks to the heart. Thank you for being part of our community. Together, let's redefine what it means to truly succeed. The air in Saltwater, the Four Seasons Boston's renowned restaurant, was thick with the scent of seared scallops and aged wine, but Damien Cole barely noticed. He sat at his usual private table, a Bordeaux poured before him, the liquid swirling in his glass as his mind remained elsewhere. Another deal sign, and another acquisition under his belt, another step forward in a never-ending climb toward a peak that no longer felt worth reaching. He should be celebrating, but the familiar emptiness gnawed at him, a relentless specter haunting even his most public victories. Then, it happened. A sound so distinct, so achingly familiar, cut through the hum of polite dinner conversations and clinking silverware. Laughter, a laugh that once filled his world, that had been his refuge before everything fell apart. Damien's hand froze mid-swirl, his grip tightening around the delicate crystal. He knew that sound. His head snapped up, his pulse spiking with something raw and dangerous. And there she was, Catherine, Kate, the only woman who had ever truly seen him, the only one who had loved him before the empire, before the billion-dollar mergers, before he became a man obsessed with winning at all costs. She was radiant, just as he remembered, but there was something even more striking about her now, a quiet confidence, a grace that time hadn't stolen. The golden light from the chandeliers caught in her honey blonde hair, illuminating her profile as she laughed at something that had nothing to do with him. But it wasn't just her presence that sent his world careening off its axis. Two children sat beside her, a boy and a girl. Damien's breath left his body in a brutal exhale, his vision narrowing until all he could see was them. The girl, with her animated expressions, the way her hands moved excitedly as she spoke, it was Kate's mannerisms through and through. And the boy, God, the boy was a mirror. His hair was as dark as Damien's, his features so strikingly familiar that it was as if Damien was staring at his own childhood reflection. The wine steward appeared beside him, offering a polite inquiry about his meal, but Damien didn't hear a word. His entire existence had just fractured into before and after. Twins. They had to be 6, maybe 7. 7 years. His mind raced, calculations firing off in rapid succession, connecting timelines, memories, fragments of the past that no longer made sense. The last time he and Kate had been together. The nights when she had seemed distant, troubled, yet refused to tell him why. The sudden way she left. The divorce papers he signed without understanding, too consumed by his company's meteoric rise to ask the questions that now burned in his throat. She had known. She had been pregnant, and she had walked away. Damien's heart pounded violently against his ribs, rage and grief and something dangerously close to betrayal swirling into a storm he barely contained. His fingers dug into the white linen tablecloth, the fabric bunching beneath his grip. Kate turned then, as if sensing him, and the moment their eyes met, the world around them seemed to collapse, her face drained of color. The wine glass in her hand trembled ever so slightly, the only sign that she was just as shaken as he was. For a moment, just a moment, there was something unspoken between them. A lifetime of memories, 1,000 unasked questions, 7 years of silence screaming through a single glance. Then the boy, his son, looked up. The boy's dark eyes met Damien's, widening in curiosity, some instinctual recognition flickering across his young face. Damien felt something inside him crack wide open. His son, his daughter, and he had never known. The pain was suffocating, twisting inside him like a blade plunged deep into his ribs. How could she have done this? What right did she have to keep them from him? What had she told them about him? That he was just some absent father who had chosen his business over them? That he never cared? The anger burned white hot, but beneath it, fear. Because if she had hidden them from him for this long, if she had truly believed that they were better off without him, what if she had been right? Kate whispered something to the twins, her voice low but urgent. Then, with the same fierce determination that had once captivated him in courtrooms and late-night debates, she rose from her seat. She was coming toward him. Damien barely registered the wine steward stepping aside, the murmur of restaurant patrons shifting in their chairs, curious but unaware that their dining experience had just become the backdrop of a reckoning. Kate stopped at his table, close enough that he could smell the faintest trace of her perfume, jasmine and something soft, something that once felt like home. Her hands were steady now, though he noticed the way she had to force them to be. "We need to talk." It wasn't a request. Damien pushed back his chair slowly, forcing himself to breathe, forcing himself not to let the fury and devastation unravel him right there in the middle of salt water. His gaze flickered past her, back to the table where his children sat. His daughter was back to her dessert, oblivious. But his son was still watching, studying him with sharp, intelligent eyes that knew. Damien swallowed hard and looked back at Kate. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough, barely controlled. "We do." And with that, he followed her into the unknown. His world no longer the carefully structured empire he had built, but a chaotic, beautiful, undeniable reality. If you felt the weight of Damien's discovery, if you believe every parent deserves the truth about their children, let us know in the comments. What would you do in his place? Would you be able to forgive? Like this video to support Damien on his journey, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories that remind us of what truly matters. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story that speaks to the heart. Thank you for being part of this journey, because sometimes the biggest revelations come when we least expect them. The alcove near the bar was dimly lit, the low hum of jazz filtering through the speakers, but Damien Cole barely noticed. His entire world had been upended in the span of minutes, and now, standing face to face with the woman who had once been his entire life, he could barely breathe. His pulse pounded in his ears, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. "Say it," he demanded, his voice raw, barely controlled. "Tell me they're mine." Kate stood before him, poised as ever, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers curled slightly against the silk of her navy dress. She had once been unreadable to him, a fortress of sharp intellect and calculated grace. But now he saw the cracks, the pain, the regret, the fear. "They're yours, Damien," she said finally, her voice steady, but her eyes betrayed her. They gleamed with unspoken emotions, years of a truth buried too deep. "Emma and Ethan. They'll be 7 next month." The air left his lungs in a brutal exhale. 7 years. 7 years of birthdays he never celebrated, scraped knees he never kissed, bedtime stories he never read. His twins, his children, had lived an entire life without him, and he hadn't even known they existed. His throat tightened, rage and grief warring for dominance inside him. "You had no right, Kate," he whispered, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. "No right to keep them from me." She flinched just slightly, but it was enough. He had always been able to read her, even when she tried to hide behind her walls. "I did what I had to do," she said, her jaw tightening. "You don't get to stand here and act like you were some devoted husband who would have dropped everything for them." Damien's temper flared. "I deserve to know, no matter what happened between us, no matter how much we hurt each other. I had a right to know I was a father." Kate's breath hitched, and for the first time her composure wavered. She folded her arms tightly across her chest, as if bracing herself against a storm. "And what would you have done, Damien?" she shot back, her voice rising slightly. "Would you have dropped the Singapore merger? Would you have walked away from Reynolds Corp when it finally became everything you wanted it to be?" He opened his mouth to argue, but the words died in his throat because he knew, deep down, he didn't have an answer she would believe. She exhaled sharply, looking away for a moment before turning back to him. "I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after I filed for divorce," she admitted, her voice quieter now, almost tired. "I sat in that doctor's office, staring at the ultrasound, and I thought about calling you. I almost did. But then I pictured you, half a world away, buried in another deal, another negotiation, another step towards something you swore was for us, but it was always just for you." Damien felt like she had just punched him in the gut. You weren't there when I was sick every morning, she continued, her voice growing thick with emotion. You weren't there when I was terrified about how I would do this alone. You weren't there when I held them for the first time. She blinked rapidly, forcing back tears. And when I finally let myself accept the truth that you were never going to be the man I needed, the father they needed, I made a choice. I chose to protect them. From me? Damien's voice broke, the accusation in it barely disguised. Kate swallowed hard, and for a long moment, she didn't answer. Then with devastating softness, she whispered, from the version of you that you had become. The words hit him harder than any business failure, harder than any betrayal he had faced in his cutthroat industry. He had spent his entire life believing he was in control, that his choices had been sacrifices made for a greater purpose. But here, standing before the woman he once loved, the mother of his children, he saw the reality he had been blind to for years. He hadn't just lost Kate. He had lost everything. The weight of it crushed him, the guilt unbearable. He had missed their first steps, their first words, the quiet, beautiful moments that made fatherhood more than just a title. He had been so consumed by his ambition, so obsessed with building an empire, that he had let his own family slip through his fingers without even realizing it. Damien ran a shaking hand through his hair, his mind racing through the lost years. He thought of all the holidays he had spent alone, convinced that loneliness was the price of success. He had always told himself he could have a family later, that once the company was truly secure, he could step back and make time for the things that mattered. But later had never come, and now his children, their children, knew nothing about him. He was a stranger to them, a man they had only just seen for the first time, not knowing that he had spent the last 7 years unaware of their existence. Kate watched him carefully, as if bracing for his next move. They're happy, Damien, she said, her voice softer now. They're brilliant. Emma is already 2 grades ahead in math, and Ethan is a chess champion. She hesitated, then gave him a look that was almost unreadable. He studies business strategies. He analyzes companies. He wants to be a lawyer, like you. Damien's chest ached. His son had been following in his footsteps without even knowing who he was. He turned his gaze back toward the restaurant, toward the table where they sat. Ethan was reading again, brows furrowed in concentration. Emma was carefully cutting her dessert into small, perfect squares, just like he did with his own meals. They were his. They were his. The realization threatened to consume him. What now? He asked, finally, his voice hoarse. What do I do, Kate? Because I can't just walk away from them. Not now, not ever. She sighed, rubbing her arms as if trying to shake off a chill. I don't know, she admitted. I don't have all the answers, Damien, but I know this. If you want to be in their lives, it's not going to be on your terms. It's not about you anymore. It's about them. He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He had spent years negotiating billion-dollar deals, bending corporations to his will. But this wasn't something he could control. This was something he had to earn. If Damien's story has made you feel something, if you believe every parent deserves the truth, if you've ever struggled with the balance between ambition and family, tell us in the comments. What would you do in his place? Would you fight for a second chance? Like this video to support Damien's journey toward redemption, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. Turn on notifications so you never miss a moment that reminds us all of what truly matters. Because sometimes the hardest truths lead to the most important choices. And sometimes the biggest second chance isn't in business. It's in love, family, and the moments we fight to reclaim. Damien Cole had spent his life making ruthless decisions, cutting through negotiations with a precision that left even seasoned executives in awe. But now, standing in the dimly lit alcove of a restaurant, the weight of a single truth was pressing down on him with unbearable force. He had missed everything, not just a birthday or a holiday here and there, not just a scattered moment of absence that could be explained away by late meetings or urgent business calls. No, he had missed their entire childhoods. 7 years of laughter, scraped knees, bedtime stories. 7 years of tiny hands reaching up for comfort. 7 years of whispered secrets between siblings. of inside jokes and small victories that had nothing to do with billion-dollar deals. He had been absent for every milestone, every here, every triumph. Damien staggered back a step, gripping the edge of a nearby table as if he could physically hold himself together. His pulse roared in his ears, drowning out the chatter of the restaurant. Kate stood in front of him, her expression unreadable, but she didn't have to say a word. The truth was already carved into his soul like a wound that would never heal. He clenched his jaw, but his voice still came out broken. Their first steps. Who was there? Kate hesitated, and it was the hesitation that shattered him. My sister Sarah, she admitted quietly. She was with me when they both took their first steps. A sharp, burning sensation stabbed through his chest. He could picture it. Two tiny toddlers, their chubby legs wobbling, their hands reaching out for balance. And he hadn't been there. Another person had seen them take those monumental first steps in life. Another person had clapped for them, had scooped them up in celebration while he had been, what, sitting in some sterile boardroom, poring over numbers that meant nothing now? His stomach twisted violently. He swallowed hard, forcing the next question past his tight throat. Their first words? Kate pressed her lips together, her gaze lowering. Emma said mama first. Ethan's first word was book. He was obsessed with them, even before he could read. A choked sound escaped Damien before he could stop it. Not Dada, not Daddy. His son had spoken his first word, and he had never even heard the sound of his baby's voice. His fingers curled into fists, nails digging into his palms. Did they ask about me? Kate let out a slow breath, and for the first time her composure wavered. At first, no. They were too young, but as they got older, she hesitated, glancing back toward the restaurant where their children sat, oblivious to the storm raging inside him. Ethan was the first to ask. He wanted to know why other kids had fathers who picked them up from school, but he didn't. Damien's entire body locked up. He had done that. His absence had made his own son question if he was worth having a father at all. His vision blurred for a moment, rage mixing with grief in a toxic, suffocating cocktail. And what did you tell them? Kate lifted her chin slightly, her voice firm despite the emotions in her eyes. I told them the truth, or as much of it as they could understand, that you were someone who had a very important job, someone who helped companies grow and succeed. I told them you weren't a bad person, just, she exhaled, shaking her head, just too busy. Damien's chest caved. Too busy. That was what he had been reduced to in their minds. A shadow, a distant figure who chose boardrooms over bedtime stories, who chose mergers over milestones. His entire life, everything he had built, now felt like ashes. His knees nearly gave out, and he sank into a nearby chair, pressing his fingers against his temples. I thought I had time, he whispered. It wasn't directed at Kate, not really. It was a confession to himself. I thought once the company was stable, once the biggest deals were done, I could come back? Kate finished, her voice softer now. Damien, that's not how it works. You don't get to pause their childhood and hit play when you're finally ready. A bitter laugh escaped him, filled with self-loathing. No, he admitted, I don't. Silence stretched between them, thick with everything that had been lost. Damien dragged a hand through his hair, his breath uneven. Tell me something, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. What was I doing the day they were born? Kate's expression darkened, and she didn't answer right away. And then finally she said the words that would haunt him forever. You were in Hong Kong, she murmured, finalizing the Whitmore acquisition. Damien shot to his feet, staggering backward as if she had physically struck him. The Whitmore acquisition. A billion-dollar deal that had made headlines, that had solidified his company's dominance in the market. That had cost him the moment his children took their first breaths. A broken sound tore from his throat, something between a gasp and a curse. He had chosen that deal over their first cries, over holding them in his arms for the first time. He had thought he was building a future. Instead, he had erased himself from theirs. His body shook, his vision tunneling as regret swallowed him whole. For the first time in his life, Damien Cole, billionaire industry titan, a man who never lost, had lost everything that truly mattered. And he wasn't sure if he would ever get it back. If this moment hit you as hard as it hit Damien, Show your support by liking this video. Let him know that second chances matter. Let him know that redemption is possible. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to follow Damien's journey because his story isn't over yet. Tell us in the comments, have you ever realized too late what truly mattered? Would you fight for a second chance if you were in Damien's place? Together, let's remind the world that success isn't about wealth. It's about love, family, and the moments we can never get back. Damien Cole had spent his life calculating risks, predicting market trends, and outmaneuvering competitors with ruthless efficiency. But no amount of strategic thinking had prepared him for this moment. Across the restaurant, just beyond the archway, his children sat, completely unaware of the war raging inside him. His heart thundered against his ribs as he studied them, committing every detail to memory as if they would vanish the moment he blinked. Emma, the little girl with honey blonde curls that framed her face like a halo, spoke animatedly, her hands moving as she explained something to her brother. She had Kate's smile, the same light in her eyes, the same expressive way of talking that made people hang on to her every word. Damien had seen Kate in courtrooms, wielding logic and passion like a weapon, and now here was their daughter, doing the same thing. Beside her, Ethan sat quietly, methodically cutting his food into perfect squares. The intensity in his eyes, the serious concentration etched onto his small features, it was uncannily familiar. Damien's breath hitched. Ethan wasn't just a quiet boy. He was a strategist, a mirror. The realization shook him to his core. He could see himself in his son. The way he assessed his surroundings, the way his fingers tapped rhythmically against the table as if he were already planning his next move, it was exactly what Damien used to do as a child. And then Ethan did something that made Damien's knees nearly buckle. He reached into his backpack, pulled out a small notebook, and began writing. Not just scribbling, not doodling, but writing with purpose. Damien recognized the movement instantly. It was the same way he had mapped out business plans as a kid, before he even understood what they were. Kate had said Ethan wanted to be a lawyer, that he had an interest in business, but she hadn't told him that their son had been studying his company. A rush of emotions surged inside Damien: pride, disbelief, grief for the years he had lost, and something deeper, something terrifying. Had Ethan ever wished for a father to guide him? Had he ever looked at other kids with their dads and wondered why he didn't have one? Damien felt like he was standing at the edge of a precipice, staring down at all the moments he had never known to treasure. His fingers clenched into fists at his sides. He needed to know more. "Kate," he rasped, forcing himself to find his voice. "Tell me about them." She hesitated, then followed his gaze back toward the children. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, layered with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "Emma is already 2 grades ahead in math," she said. "She loves problem solving. Numbers make sense to her in a way that the world doesn't always seem to." Kate exhaled a soft laugh. "And she has a stubborn streak. Your stubborn streak. She won't accept something just because someone tells her it's true. She has to test it, prove it to herself." Damien swallowed against the lump rising in his throat. "And Ethan?" His voice was barely above a whisper now, as if saying it too loudly would break him. Kate glanced at their son, her expression unreadable. "Ethan is brilliant, Ichai," she said. "Not just in school, though he's ahead in reading and analysis, but in how he sees things. He doesn't just accept information, Damien. He dissects it. He breaks it down, studies it from every angle." Damien's chest tightened painfully. "And chess?" Kate nodded, her lips pressing together. "He's a champion. Won the state tournament last month." A small, bittersweet smile touched her lips. "He studies strategies like they're puzzles he was born to solve. He plans 10 steps ahead of his opponents." The floor beneath Damien might as well have vanished. That was him. That was exactly how his mind worked. The realization was a brutal punch to the gut. How many nights had Ethan sat alone, poring over chess books, perfecting his strategies, when he should have had a father to teach him? "Does he?" Damien's voice cracked. He cleared his throat, trying again. "Does he know anything about me?" Kate hesitated. "He knows you exist," she admitted. "I never lied about that, but I never told them much either. I didn't want them to grow up with an idea of you that wasn't real. I wanted them to see for themselves if you ever showed up." Damien flinched. He deserved that. And then, as if fate had decided to twist the knife even deeper, Emma's voice rang out across the restaurant. "Mom, Ethan's being weird about his food again." The familiarity of it, Kate's exasperation mirrored in their daughter, almost undid him. Kate sighed. "I should go back before she starts a full-scale debate on dining etiquette." She hesitated, then glanced at him. "I know this is a lot, and I know you're angry." Angry? The word didn't even come close. He was devastated, furious at the universe, at himself, at every choice he had made that led to this moment. But beneath all of it, one thought burned brighter than the rest. "I want to meet them," Damien said, his voice hoarse. "Not as a stranger, not from across a restaurant. I want to know them." Kate studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "We're in town for a few more days," she said quietly. "Ethan has a robotics competition tomorrow. If you're serious about this, be there." He didn't even hesitate. "Tell me when and where." She gave him the details, then turned to leave. But before she could walk away, Damien grabbed her wrist, not to stop her, but to anchor himself. "Kate," his voice was unsteady, "thank you for raising them, for giving them everything he hadn't, for doing it alone without him when she shouldn't have had to." Kate's gaze softened, just for a moment, before she pulled away and returned to their children. Damien watched as she bent down to talk to Ethan, smoothing a hand over his dark hair in a way that made his chest ache. His son, his daughter, a future he hadn't known existed, and now a future he couldn't walk away from. If you believe every parent deserves a second chance, leave a comment below to encourage Damien. Should he fight to be in their lives? What would you do if you were in his place? Like this video if you believe that family is worth more than any business deal. Subscribe for more powerful stories, because sometimes the most unexpected moments change everything. Because sometimes the best strategies aren't made in boardrooms. They're made at home. Damien Cole had spent his life in control. Every step of his career had been a calculated move. Every deal a carefully orchestrated masterpiece of negotiation and precision. He had built an empire from the ground up, securing his name among the elite, ensuring his legacy would be one of power and financial dominance. Yet, for the first time in his life, he felt utterly powerless. As he stood outside the MIT Johnson Athletic Center, where the robotics competition was being held, his heart pounded harder than it had in any boardroom showdown. This wasn't a billion-dollar acquisition, a hostile takeover, or a courtroom battle. This was his children. His children. Even now, the word felt foreign in his mind, like something precious that didn't quite belong to him. He had no claim over them, no right to call himself their father. Not yet, but he would fight for them. The promise had formed deep in his soul the moment he saw them sitting in that restaurant, their small faces unknowingly reflecting parts of him back at him. Ethan's quiet intensity, Emma's boundless curiosity, their brilliant minds already shaping futures he had never been a part of. They were everything he never knew he wanted, everything he never even knew existed until last night. And he had lost 7 years. 7 years. He couldn't let another second slip away. As he stepped inside, his eyes scanned the bustling competition floor. Children, parents, and instructors moved through the space, voices overlapping in excited chatter. The scent of coffee and whiteboard markers filled the air. Laptops glowed with data, and the whirring sounds of tiny robots navigating obstacle courses echoed through the hall. And then he saw them. Ethan stood next to a sleek, well-designed robot, his brows furrowed as he adjusted a sensor. Emma was beside him, explaining something to their teammate with her hands moving wildly in excitement. They belonged here. They weren't just participants, they were leaders in their element. For a moment, Damien hesitated. Would they even want him here? Would Kate regret inviting him? Then, as if sensing his presence, Ethan looked up. His dark eyes locked onto Damien's across the competition floor, sharp and assessing. He didn't say anything, didn't run to him or call out, but he didn't look away either. Instead, he nudged Emma, murmuring something to her. Emma turned. Her reaction was immediate, wide eyes, a sharp intake of breath, and then, to Damien's complete shock, a smile. Not hesitant, not forced, but a smile full of pure, bright curiosity. He took a step forward, then another, and before he knew it, he was standing in front of them. Kate was there too, holding a cup of coffee. She lifted a brow as if assessing him, waiting to see if he would prove himself worthy of this moment. Ethan spoke first. "You actually came." There was no accusation in his tone, just quiet surprise, as if he had expected Damien to be like every other absentee father who made empty promises. Damien nodded, forcing himself to keep his voice steady. "I said I would." Ethan studied him for a long moment, then simply nodded back and turned back to his robot. Emma, however, was less reserved. "Do you know anything about robotics?" she asked, tilting her head. "Or are you just here to watch?" Damien let out a short breath of a laugh. "I know how to build companies, not robots, but I'd like to learn." Emma's grin widened. "Good answer. Mom says learning new things keeps your brain sharp." Beside her, Kate smirked into her coffee. Ethan, still focused on adjusting his robot, muttered, "I'm guessing that's why she made you read all those business law books." Emma groaned. "Don't remind me. Those were so boring." Damien blinked. "Wait, you've been reading business law books?" Ethan shrugged. "Some, mostly about ethical corporate structures, but I like financial case studies better." Damien nearly choked. His 7-year-old son was reading financial case studies? The weight of what he had missed hit him all over again. How many nights had Ethan sat in bed, flipping through pages that Damien would have loved to discuss with him? How many moments had Emma spent sketching out ideas for inventions that he never got to encourage? "I would have loved to read with you," Damien said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Both of you." Ethan didn't look up, but his small shoulders stiffened slightly, like he wasn't sure how to respond. Kate spoke up. "We still have a little time before their competition starts. If you want, you can watch them test the robot." Emma lit up. "Yes, you have to see it. It's so cool." She grabbed Damien's wrist before he could even react, pulling him toward their testing station with an energy that made his heart ache. He should have been here all along. He watched, utterly captivated, as Ethan demonstrated the robot's precision, explaining in remarkable detail how the coding worked. Emma narrated their design choices with enthusiasm, and Damien found himself hanging on to every word. And then, it happened. Ethan turned to him, eyes flickering with something hesitant, something almost hopeful. "Do you play chess?" Damien's breath caught. This was it, a test, a small but significant offering, a way in. He could lie, brush it off, or he could take this moment for what it was, a fragile, tentative bridge between them. "I used to," Damien admitted. "I was pretty good, but I bet you could beat me now." For the first time, Ethan smiled, a small, almost imperceptible lift of his lips, but Damien saw it. "Maybe," Ethan said. "We'll see." And just like that, something shifted. It wasn't everything. It wasn't an instant fix for the years lost. But it was a start. When the competition began, Damien took a seat beside Kate, watching as their children thrived. Every time Emma and Ethan made a successful adjustment, his chest swelled with pride. They were brilliant, and they were his. As Emma high-fived her teammate and Ethan adjusted the robot's speed, Damien leaned slightly toward Kate. "They're incredible," he murmured. Kate didn't look at him, but there was something softer in her voice when she responded. "They always have been." Damien exhaled slowly, staring at the life he had missed, the life he wasn't going to miss anymore. The elevator doors slid open, revealing the dimly lit elegance of Damien Cole's penthouse suite. He had walked into this room 1,000 times before, stepping into luxury that most people could only dream of. But tonight was different. Tonight he wasn't alone. Emma and Ethan stepped inside hesitantly, their gazes sweeping across the grand space. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed the glittering Boston skyline, the city stretching far and wide below them. But Damien wasn't looking at the view. He was watching them. Emma gasped, running straight to the massive windows. "You can see everything from up here," she breathed, pressing her hands against the glass. "Mom, look." Kate stepped in behind them, smiling softly but staying back, giving Damien space to take in the moment. Ethan, ever the more reserved of the two, wandered over to the sleek marble chessboard near the fireplace. His small fingers traced the intricately carved pieces, studying them with the quiet intensity Damien had already come to recognize. "You play?" Damien asked, stepping closer. Ethan nodded, eyes still on the board. Yeah, a small pause. Mom taught me the basics, but I like figuring out my own strategies. Something warm flickered in Damien's chest. That's the best way to learn. Ethan finally looked up. Do you play? The question held weight, a test, a bridge. Damien had seen enough boardrooms to know when he was being assessed. His son was watching him closely, waiting to see what kind of answer he would give. I used to play all the time, Damien admitted, glancing at the board. But it's been years. He exhaled, then smiled slightly. You'd probably beat me. Ethan's lips twitched upward, just slightly. We'll see. It wasn't much, but it was something. Emma, meanwhile, was still mesmerized by the view, but something else caught her attention. She spotted Damien's desk, a sleek, modern workspace covered in neatly arranged documents, a laptop, and a few scattered notes. But it wasn't the contracts or financial reports that made her eyes light up. You have notebooks, she exclaimed, darting over. Damien frowned, following her gaze. Yeah. Emma turned to him, her expression dead serious. Do you use them? A soft chuckle escaped Kate from where she stood. Damien arched a brow. What do you mean? Emma crossed her arms. I mean, do you write ideas in them? Or are they just for boring business stuff? Damien laughed, shaking his head. I guess that depends on what you consider boring. Emma huffed. Business reports, stocks, spreadsheets. She waved a hand dramatically. That kind of thing. He smirked. Then yeah, probably boring. Emma sighed as if it was a personal tragedy. That's a waste of a good notebook. Damien leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. And what do you use your notebooks for? That was all the invitation she needed. Within seconds, she had pulled a well-worn notebook from her backpack, flipping it open to a page filled with intricate sketches of mechanical arms. It's for my robot designs, she explained, her voice bubbling with excitement. Ethan does all the programming, but I build the actual moving parts. See this? She pointed at one of her drawings. It's an arm that can rotate a full 360 degrees without jamming. The one we built for the competition only moves 180 degrees, but I think if I tweak the motor settings. She paused, suddenly looking up at him, as if remembering who she was talking to. Damien felt it, that hesitation. She wasn't sure if he cared, if he really wanted to hear this, and that realization hit him harder than he expected. He crouched down so they were eye level. That's impressive, he said, and meant it. You built that? Emma's hesitation melted away. Yeah. Well, Ethan helped with the coding, but the mechanics are mine. Damien reached out, tapping the drawing. And this part here, what's the biggest problem you're facing with it? Emma blinked, then beamed. Kate, still standing in the background, tilted her head slightly, watching. Damien spent the next several minutes listening as Emma rattled off theories, mechanical issues, and future design ideas. She spoke fast, her hands moving animatedly, completely in her element. And the more she talked, the more Damien saw himself in her. She was driven, passionate, creative, and she had no idea how much of him she carried. Ethan, sitting back at the chessboard, watched quietly. Damien knew he was listening, analyzing everything, the same way he had observed him in the restaurant. You really think it's good? Emma asked suddenly, her voice quieter, more uncertain. My designs. Damien's chest ached. Emma, he said softly, holding her gaze. I think they're brilliant. Her whole face lit up. It was such a simple moment, yet it broke him, because how many times had she worked on something, wondering if the father she had never met would have been proud? How many times had Ethan read through business reports, unknowingly following in Damien's footsteps, with no father to tell him he was already great? Damien swallowed the lump in his throat and turned back to Ethan. How about that chess game, he asked. Ethan hesitated, then, without a word, started setting up the pieces. Damien sat across from him, mirroring his movements, the weight of the moment settling over him. As the game began, Emma curled up on the couch nearby, still flipping through her notebook, occasionally glancing up to watch them. Kate leaned against the counter, watching the scene unfold. The game was silent, calculated, thoughtful. And halfway through, Damien realized something. Ethan was setting traps. Small ones. Clever ones. Moves that weren't obvious at first but built over time. He was planning ahead. Damien grinned. You play like a businessman. Ethan frowned slightly. What do you mean? You don't just play to win, you play to control the board. You think 10 moves ahead. Ethan stared at him, and for the first time that night, there was something different in his expression. Recognition. Damien let the silence stretch between them before adding, I did the same thing when I was your age. Ethan didn't say anything, but his next move was a good one. And when he finally won, Damien sat back laughing. All right, you've got me. That was impressive. Ethan looked down at the board like he wasn't sure how to react, like he wasn't used to hearing that from someone like him. Then quietly he murmured, Mom never beats me. Kate snorted from the kitchen. I don't even try anymore. Emma rolled her eyes. That's because you always fall for his traps. Ethan smirked. And Damien felt something shift. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Damien Cole sat at his penthouse desk, his fingers hovering over his phone, his heartbeat echoing in his ears. For the first time in his entire career, he was about to do something unimaginable. He was going to cancel. The press conference had been scheduled for weeks. The entire corporate world was waiting for his announcement, a multi-billion-dollar merger that would send stock prices soaring, further solidifying his status as a business mogul. His assistant had already confirmed attendance from top-tier investors, financial analysts, and reporters from every major business publication. The press release had been written, speeches prepared, and the cameras were already being set up at Reynolds Corp headquarters. But none of it mattered. Not now. Not after tonight. Not after them. Damien lifted his gaze from his phone, his eyes drifting to the chessboard near the fireplace, where Ethan had defeated him just hours ago. He could still see his son's cautious smirk, the small glimmer of satisfaction in his dark eyes, the same eyes Damien saw in the mirror every morning. And then there was Emma, curled up on the couch, flipping through her notebook filled with robot designs, excitedly explaining each moving part. She had his mind, his hunger for innovation. His children had been in front of him this entire time, growing, learning, becoming incredible little people without him. And he had almost missed it. For 7 years, he had given everything to his company. Late nights, early mornings, holidays spent in boardrooms instead of at home. He had sacrificed friendships, love, and family in the pursuit of building something bigger. But what was the point of an empire if there was no one to share it with? Damien clenched his jaw and pressed the call button. His assistant, Olivia, answered immediately. Mr. Cole, I was just about to cancel the press conference, Damien interrupted, his voice rough but firm. A stunned silence followed. Excuse me? Olivia finally said, as if she had misheard him. Cancel it, he repeated, gripping the phone tighter, and clear my schedule for the next few days. Another beat of silence. Sir, with all due respect, this deal— I don't care about the deal, Damien snapped, then exhaled, forcing himself to soften his tone. Just handle it. I won't be in tomorrow. But he hung up before she could argue. His hands were shaking. Damien Cole never canceled. In all his years in business, through acquisitions, takeovers, and crises, he had never once walked away from a major event. Even after his divorce, when Kate had left him, he had thrown himself into work, determined to prove to himself, to the world, that he could build something that would last. And yet in one night, his entire perspective had shifted. Because tonight he had won something far greater than a deal. He had won the chance to be a father. He pushed back from his desk, running a hand through his hair. His phone buzzed again. Probably Olivia, probably the board, probably someone panicking over his decision. But he ignored it. Instead, he walked toward the penthouse window, staring out at the city below. 7 years ago, he had convinced himself that he was making sacrifices for the future, that he would make time later when the company was secure, when the work slowed down. But later never came. And now his son read financial reports, unknowingly following in his footsteps. His daughter built machines, solving problems that people twice her age struggled to understand. They had been thriving without him, because he had been too late. A lump formed in his throat as another realization hit him. Had Kate been right to keep them away? Damien had spent years resenting her for leaving. He had convinced himself that she had given up too easily, that she had walked away from their marriage without trying. But now, standing here, seeing the life she had built for their children, without him, he wondered if she had made the only choice she could. She had protected them, from the man he had been. And the truth was, the man he had been wouldn't have made this decision. The old Damian Cole would have gone to that press conference without hesitation. He would have smiled for the cameras, shaken hands with investors, and delivered the perfect speech while his children sat in a robotics competition without him. And he never would have known what he was missing. But he wasn't that man anymore. He wouldn't be. Because when Ethan had looked at him tonight, when he had asked if he played chess, when he had offered a small, hesitant piece of connection, Damien had felt something break open inside him. A door that had been locked shut for 7 years had opened just a crack, and he wouldn't let it close again. His phone buzzed again, and this time, it wasn't his assistant, it was Kate. His stomach twisted as he stared at her name on the screen. He had no idea what she would say. Would she tell him she had changed her mind? That this was a mistake? Would she say she had seen this before? Him making an effort once, only to disappear again? Would she say she didn't believe him? Or would she tell him something worse, that Ethan and Emma didn't believe him either? Damien exhaled sharply and answered. Hey, Kate's voice was softer than he expected. I just wanted to check in. His throat felt tight. About? The press would never say Nippon, she said, and for a second he thought she was going to question him, but instead she paused and said, You canceled it. Damien closed his eyes, running a hand down his face. Yeah. Another silence. Then quietly Kate said, I didn't think you would. It wasn't a challenge, it wasn't an accusation. It was honest. And it hurt more than anything she could have said, because it meant she had expected him to choose work again. And for 7 years he would have. Damien swallowed hard. I know I have a lot to prove. Kate didn't answer right away. Then after a moment she sighed. You do. But I will, Damien said, and this time there was no hesitation, because he meant it. For the first time in his life, Damien Cole wasn't chasing success. He was chasing something far greater. He was chasing time. Time with the children he never knew he had. Time he couldn't afford to lose again. Kate Reynolds had always been good at reading people. It was what made her a brilliant lawyer, a relentless strategist in court. But as she stood in front of Damien Cole, watching the man who once let her down, now fighting to be part of their children's lives, she wasn't sure what to believe. People didn't change overnight. She had spent 7 years raising Emma and Ethan alone, shielding them from the heartbreak of an absent father. She had accepted, mourned the fact that Damien had chosen his empire over their family. She had moved on, built a life without him. And now here he was, canceling press conferences, clearing his schedule, looking at their children like they were the most important thing in his world. Kate wanted to believe it was real, that he wasn't just making a grand gesture, that this wasn't temporary guilt or fleeting sentimentality. But her heart had been broken before. She had seen this before. You need to understand something, Damien, she said, folding her arms across her chest, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. If you want to be in their lives, it's not just for today, not just for the competition, or this week, or whenever it's convenient for you. His jaw tensed. I know. No, I don't think you do. She took a breath, forcing herself to hold his gaze. Because I've spent the last 7 years picking up the pieces of broken promises. I've seen Emma watching her friends with their fathers, wondering why hers was never there. I've watched Ethan bury himself in books, in strategy games, in things he can control because the one person who should have been there for him never was. Damien flinched. She saw it. The pain that flashed across his face, the guilt that settled deep in his eyes. Good. He needed to feel it. I'm not asking you to be perfect, Kate continued, her voice softening just slightly. I'm not expecting you to make up for every lost moment overnight. But if you walk into their lives now, if you make them hope and then disappear again, it will break them, Damien, and I won't let that happen. A thick silence stretched between them. Then Damien did something she didn't expect. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Right there in front of her, he opened his calendar, the meticulously planned back-to-back schedule that had ruled his life for years, and began deleting. Meetings, calls, business trips. One by one they vanished. Kate's breath caught. I don't need you to prove this to me, she said, her voice quieter now, more vulnerable than she intended. I need you to prove it to them. Damien met her gaze, something fierce, unwavering in his eyes. I will, he vowed. I'm all in. Damien Cole had spent his life building an empire, making calculated risks, and securing his place as one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. He had spent years chasing success, believing that power and wealth were the only measures of a life well lived. But as he sat at his penthouse desk, staring at the email draft that could change everything, he realized he had been wrong. The cursor blinked, waiting. The subject line read restructuring and new priorities. A carefully crafted email, precise and direct, the way Damien had always done business. But this was different. This wasn't about expanding his empire. This was about reclaiming the one thing he had truly lost, his family. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He could already imagine the shockwaves this decision would send through his board, his investors, the press. Damien Cole, the unstoppable titan of industry, the man who never missed a deal, the CEO who had built Reynolds Corp into an empire, was stepping back. For 7 years, he had convinced himself that every sleepless night, every missed anniversary, every sacrifice had been for something greater. That once he reached the top, then he would have time. But time didn't wait. Time had moved forward without him. And now his children had grown up, brilliant, strong, resilient, without him. He had already missed their first steps, their first words, their first birthdays. He had missed bedtime stories, school projects, inside jokes, and the small, fleeting moments that actually mattered. But he refused to miss anything else. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. A message from Kate. Ethan wants to know if you are coming to the park with us this afternoon. Chess rematch. Emma says you owe her a notebook. Damien exhaled, something tight in his chest loosening at those simple words. They were inviting him in. Not as a billionaire, not as a CEO. As their father, he turned back to the email, his decision solidifying in his mind. He began to type. Effective immediately, I will be stepping back from my day-to-day responsibilities as CEO of Reynolds Corp. This decision is not made lightly, nor is it a reaction to any business challenge. Rather, it is a deliberate choice, a necessary one. For the past decade, I have prioritized this company above all else. I have dedicated my time, my energy, and my focus to its growth, and I have no regrets about the success we have achieved together. But success in business means nothing if it comes at the cost of the things that truly matter. It is time for me to redefine success. A transition plan will be put in place to ensure that the company continues to thrive under new leadership. In the coming weeks, I will work closely with our executive team to delegate responsibilities and provide guidance as needed. I have complete confidence in our team's ability to lead Reynolds Corp into its next chapter. As for my next chapter, it belongs to my family. The moment he hit send, it was done. No going back, no last-minute second-guessing, no regrets. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking at stock projections or acquisition reports. He wasn't planning his next move in a hostile takeover or strategizing his next billion-dollar deal. He was choosing something different, and the moment he made that choice, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Relief, a weight he had carried for years. The burden of proving himself, of chasing an ideal that had only left him empty, was gone. He stood, grabbing his keys. He had a park to get to. The sun was warm, the crisp air carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and laughter. The park was alive with movement, families walking, kids running, the distant sound of a soccer game. And there, by a shaded picnic table, were his children. Emma spotted him first. Her entire face lit up. "Mom, he's here!" Ethan, who had been setting up the chessboard, looked up. Damien braced himself for indifference, for skepticism, for the hesitation that had been there before. But instead, Ethan simply nodded and said, "You're late." Damien smirked. "Traffic." Kate, sitting beside Emma, raised an eyebrow knowingly. "You walked here." "Smart," Ethan muttered, moving the chess pieces into position. "I'll be white this time." Damien took a seat across from his son. "Remind me, what happened last time?" Ethan's lips curled slightly. "You lost." Damien chuckled, shaking his head. "Let's see if I can change that today." As the game began, Emma pulled out her notebook, flipping to a fresh page. "So, about that new notebook you owe me." He glanced at her drawing, another robot design. "That's impressive," he admitted, studying the details. Have you thought about submitting it for the next competition? Emma's eyes widen. You think it's good enough? Without a doubt. She beamed, and Damien felt a warmth in his chest that no business deal had ever given him. Minutes turned into an hour. Chess moves were made, robots were discussed, laughter was shared, and in the middle of it all, Damien realized something. This right here was success. Not the boardrooms, not the power plays, not the billion-dollar deals. This, being here, being present, being their father. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light through the trees. Damien knew there was still a long road ahead. Trust wasn't rebuilt overnight. Kate still had her reservations. Ethan still kept his guard up. Emma was still testing the waters. But this was a start. And this time he wasn't walking away. Damien's journey wasn't just about reconnecting with his children. It was about redefining success. Too often we chase things we think will fulfill us. Money, power, status, only to realize too late that we've sacrificed what truly matters. We tell ourselves that we'll make time later, that once we reach our goals, we'll focus on family, on love, on the people who mean the most to us. But time doesn't wait. Moments pass. Memories are made with or without us. And if we're not careful, we'll wake up one day realizing that we built an empire, but lost everything else. Damien's story is a reminder that we always have a choice. We can keep chasing a hollow definition of success, or we can stop, look around, and ask ourselves, what truly matters? Because at the end of the day, it won't be the deals or the money we remember. It'll be the chess games, the laughter, the quiet moments in the park. Those are the things that last. Do you believe in second chances? Leave a comment below to encourage Damien. What would you have done in his place? Like this video if you believe family is worth more than success. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more powerful stories that remind us of what truly matters. Because sometimes the biggest investment you'll ever make is in the people you love.